Mon invité, Nathalie Roy.
My guest, Nathalie Roy, is here. Good day. We're going to travel back in time. We're not part of a commission of inquiry, so don't be nervous, but let's go into the past, and I want to discover how things were in your youth and what are the best memories that you have of that. What comes to mind immediately when we talk about your life as a child? My best memory are those related to nature. First of all, I was born in New Carlisle. Like René Lévesque, my parents then moved to Rimouski, and my best memories are the years of 4 to 12 when I was living in Rimouski. We had a very small little bungalow. We weren't poor, we weren't rich, but it was modest. From the kitchen, we could see the river, and the backyard was a field that went all the way back, and I'd spend time playing there. In the winter, it was skiing and snowmen, and in the summer, it was the succession of berries, strawberries, blueberries, etc. And I'd spend a lot of time there collecting berries, listening to the birds. And I realized later, when I went to live in a big city like Montreal, that nature, bird songs is something that I'm really missing. And growing up in nature, living in nature, those were the nicest moments of my youth. Who had the most influence on you, your mother or your father? I would say that it was my grandmother. Yes, my grandmother, which is the mother of my father. She was a very striking person. First of all, she'd only had one child, who was my father. And this was in the era of very large families. And this lady was a business lady. She had a millinery shop. In the 40s, it was rather rare that women had a business. So she was very extrovert, always talking. And she had impressed me much. She was very impressive. In fact, she'd arrived full of gifts. But what I didn't realize as a child is that all the gifts that she brought us were things that she had built herself. She had dresses for the dolls, a little furniture for the dollhouse, and she had a particular influence on me. And for your studies, who supervised you? Now, first of all, were you a good student? At grade school and high school, were you a good student? Yes. Actually, I have an interesting story to tell about that. My father, when report cards are handed out at grade school, the parents would go and get the report cards, and they'd say, Nathalie, come on, you're always talking. And I'm saying, what's going on? What's going on? And so I'd have A+, 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 all the way down, comments, and Nathalie talks all the time and bothers everybody. How can you be bothering everybody and still get A+ everywhere? Well, I'd finished, and so I started talking. So that was my experience in grade school. Later, as we went higher up, it was harder. And when I got to university, I realized that my little superiority complex, I had to get rid of it, because there's other people who are quite brilliant, intelligent, well outspoken. And the university brought me down a notch. And I found it to be quite challenging academically. Now, in the family, is politics already being discussed? No, not at all. Politics has no important place in our life. No, not at all. We'd listen to the news, but with a few comments, but that was about it. And I think that is quite representative of many families. We saw it in the last electoral campaign. I was surprised in discussing with friends, saying that I was heading into politics. And people would say to me, politics, I'm not interested in that. And these are people I'd see every day. And I'd realize that either they're not interesting or that it's just something that's not part of their life. We noticed that participation rate these last few years in elections was lower. This year was a bit better, where we reached 76%, much better. But nonetheless, there's a lot of people who are just quite disinterested about politics. And when it was time for you to choose your university studies, what happened in your mind? How did you see yourself? What did you think about what you would be doing later? Well, it goes back to when I was a little kid, my father kept saying, I would love to have been a lawyer, I would love to have been a lawyer. So I said to myself, well, I'll be a lawyer. But when you arrive at university and you see what's going on, at that point I didn't want to be a lawyer, but I wanted to be a newspaper person. But I said, doing law will help me be a journalist. The law is everywhere. Even when you buy something, there's a contract there. So that would, I felt, be training useful to be a journalist. I could be a little bit more explicit in writing things up because I will have had other training. So this was part of what drew me to law then. Did you have a complete training in law? Yes, I did my degree in law, and even before law, I was wondering about other things. So I took a certificate in social sciences, and then I did my degree in law, and then I did the bar studies. And when I was received, I started working as a journalist at CBC Sherbrooke, French. And that lasted for 20 years. So there was a passion for TV journalism already, yes. I'm fascinated by images. There's people who are visual and others that are auditive, but I'm fascinated by the strength of images that we see on the screen, the strength of imagery. Pictures worth 1,000 words. They say, I'd say it's worth 3,000 or 4,000 words. And I said to myself that TV journalism, that's what draws me, the strength of images and the possibility of being a privileged witness of something that happens. You go out with the cameraman and you witness to what you see. There's a certain responsibility there. And I saw a teaching aspect. I have a privilege in being here, and I have to report on what's happening here in the most accurate way possible, because that is my job. And that's how I saw my job as a journalist, to inform people, to teach people, and to be where things were happening, to see people that Mr. and Mrs. Everyman couldn't attend to. I was their witness. Were there stories that you covered and that you presented, but there was more to it than just being a journalist about them? Well, in 20 years of journalism, there were so many stories of extraordinary people and situations, but that which touched me the most as a journalist was the September 11th disaster in the newsroom. At that time, I was at TQS in Montreal. It was that was not a continuous news chain. We had the news reports at the noon and at the evening and late evening, but this was quite an event for journalism throughout the planet. And the situation was such that even our TV channel became a continuous news channel. Everybody came in, even if it wasn't our shift. And what we did is we took the feeds that we had from American channels like CNN. The images were coming in, this one after the other, different shots, because there were different people there. And there was also different cities that were affected that day. And that was coming in, and we were trying to understand what was going on and comment on it, and to our audience, one after the other, of course. And that was something that touched me quite a lot. We decided at midnight that we would stop, we'd pull the plug on this for the night, but we'd started in the afternoon, and my job was to do the final wrap-up of the day of these events, because throughout the day we were going live. And it was at that time that Jean Lapierre was the host of the late evening show, and I was with him then, and all of the journalists throughout the planet that day. It was apocalyptic. It was something that was quite extraordinary, never seen event, even if we weren't in New York or Washington, of course. But things were happening here. The planes had to land here, and information was coming from everywhere, and that was something that was really noteworthy. Then there was also the war in Iraq. It was a little bit of the same. The first incredible pictures of the bombing, that's something you'll never forget. as a journalist, a TV journalist, even if you weren't right there, but we're the first to have see the images when they come in, and we select which ones we want to use in our broadcast. At the point that you covered politics, electoral campaigns and that, I covered certain parts of politics, but I was not a parliamentary specialist. I was a generalist. I'd cover everything: car accidents, resignations of ministers, and anything in between. For example, talking about politics, we were sent at one point to cover the budget speech in Ottawa. So we were 4 people from TQS who went up there. And there's the lockup, of course, where all the journalists are given a copy of the budget, and they have access to some specialists. So I was with my little team, another journalist and 2 cameramen with some images. And we see that there's 10 people from TVA, and CBC had at least a team of 50. And here I am with my little notebook and a couple of friends. But the person watching the news later, he saw me explaining the budget. He didn't know that I was alone, whereas that there's 50 people for CBC. I think that our product was probably just as good. Okay, we'll try and compare you to the group of 50 from CBC. Now, so in small private TV stations that are running against the huge teams from public TV, they have to be very precise and complete in their coverage with all the means that are at their disposal. But I was really enchanted from that experience. Now, during that period of time, did you ever say to yourself that someday I might be there? No, you weren't thinking of it at that point in time. No, not at all. I never had that as part of my career plan. It was nothing. It never attracted me. I was a journalist. Of course, we keep our personal political opinions from us. You always took care of that, not to be identified to one party or another. No. Now people know, but they didn't then. A little bit difficult to avoid to know them now. So it was one of your major concerns. Like for most journalists, they don't show their colors. They don't comment. They don't say what their policy, their party preferences are. And there aren't any private friendships with deputies and such. Not our work has to be as most accurate, most balanced, and as possible. And I kept my opinions to myself. But seeing what happened these last some years, inquiry programs, investigations that were undertaken by newspapers about what's going on in the construction world, etc., and that started getting to me. And I said to myself, no, something's going on here. It's the same people that are there. Something's going on here, and we're being taken to the cleaners, we taxpayers, and that's when I said to myself, something has to change here. There has to be some new blood. And then Mr. Legault came along with his non-profit organization, who came out of retirement to do that. And I said, who's this guy? He retired. What's he doing? When I started listening to him, and I started following him on the news and all of that. He consulted people. He talked to people. What are Quebecers concerned about? What's happening? What are we expecting? And I said, this guy's interesting. Until he created his political party, and the fact that Mr. Legault was open-minded enough to say, let's set up a coalition of people from all the different backgrounds, we're beyond that now. And this really appealed to me. You're still a lawyer now, because you went back to school. Yes, I have my own private office as a lawyer, but I still work on TV. So when you go back to school, since you hadn't practiced law for quite some time, did you have to go back to get some complementary training? Yes, but it's particularly because I no longer had my license to practice law, because I hadn't paid my daily or my annual fee to the bar. That means you have to go through the whole exams again, yes. I have to do what was required of me by the Bar Association. Now, at that point in time, when I redid all of my classes, and this I did when the newsroom at TQS was closed down, and I said, I'll go back, get my lawyer's license, since I have time in my hands. I've been thinking about it for some time, so I should have paid my annual fee. But there's a whole process. You have to ask for permission. It's not automatic. You have to appear before a committee, a selection committee, who looks at individual cases and who decides exactly what requirements will be laid on us in order to receive our license to practice. So I did all of that, and then I went to CBC at the news channel. I worked there in the weekends, and during the week I would be studying for my bar exam. So I never stopped communicating. I went back and got my license to practice law. And of course I'm not going to lose any more because I have enough money to pay for it. But the purpose was not necessarily to open up a law office, but I still wanted to have my status of a practicing lawyer, both criminal and criminal law. Why? When I started practice at the beginning of my career, I was in civil law, divorces, family law, etc. And I wasn't really, I didn't really like that. But having covered trials as a journalist, I said, oh, that's interesting. This is deep stuff. And it attracted me to see the lawyers that were in criminal practice. And I had friends, of course, who I went to university with who were in criminal practice. Is it just fascinating? It looks interesting from the outside. It appears like some of those TV series we see. No, that's not quite what I'm doing. When you start out, you don't have these murders and these big cases like that. What we're do is we have first offenders, usually people who are arrested and who have to appear before court, but they're not criminals. But all of a sudden, they're a part of the system now. And it can go quite quickly. For example, driving under the influence. How many people are good, solid citizens and one evening think that they're in full possession of their means and bang, they get caught? A lot of people this happens to, and we had a lot of clients in this situation. And then there's people who have arguments, and they say something that goes a little bit too far, so someone phones the police. He threatened to hit me, and he can be accused of a crime. And the person's life is upside down from that point on, because as soon as you get the notice from the police saying you have to show up in court because you're accused of this or that criminal offense, then you need a lawyer. And so those are the kinds of clients we have. A simple possession of a controlled substance. With the laws that are changing today, some people think that they're allowed to hold a small quantity of marijuana for therapeutic purposes or something, or a small quantity of narcotics are permissible. And all of a sudden the police go into a bar, search people, and people are arrested for a very small quantity. It's not legal, it's illegal, because there's an impression sometime that now it's tolerated. No one is supposed to ignore the law, famous saying, that's right, but there's some false beliefs about the consumption of drugs, particularly what is called soft drugs, that it's tolerated or even permitted. But possession is not permitted of any quantity at all. Now, obviously, the penalty will be greater if the quantity is greater, but these people end up in this system, the criminal system. These are criminal charges. A person who had a little bit too much wine at supper, he gets in his car and drives away, that gives you a criminal record. And this can prevent you, for example, from entering the United States. They changed the law down there. It's even more complicated to get a pardon these days also. Before it was easier, and it will now and henceforth be much more difficult to get a pardon. So a criminal record can cause you a lot of problems if you work in places where people expect you not to have one. In a casino or even in a bar. You have a criminal record, so your whole life can be upside down, particularly when it's for such a very small or a crime, but it is a crime nonetheless. So people might be thinking about big murder trials and that kind of thing. Well, I have some colleagues who do that, but that's not what I was doing. Yeah, since I was just starting out, I had these other kinds of cases that I was talking about, but I found it quite interesting. And what I found particularly interesting is that everything isn't black and white. When you look at the police proof, sometimes there are mistakes there. And sometimes you might even think that the police have, I wouldn't quite say invented their proof, but stacked the deck, say, because when you look at everything together, you see that something is wrong. You see the evidence is actually quite weak. We listen to what the person tells us. We see both sides, and we look at the police file, and we look at the two of them together, and we see that it's day and night. Oh, the truth must be somewhere in between, and I find that fascinating. It's also fascinating to see you teamed up with François Legault. Now, that's something quite different and fascinating, yes. Now, I'm a passionate person. I like to learn. For me, this is quite a new world that's opening up, and I was quite surprised. Now, you have known this arena for quite some time, but I could only see what we saw on the evening news because I didn't cover the National Assembly of Quebec. Now, the cameras that are in there look at capture the picture of the person who's speaking, and we don't see what's going on around the person. You might see just a little bit beside the speaker. But what you don't see is that sometimes the National Assembly is completely empty. Rarely will they give us a broad shot showing that there's only a few people in the National Assembly, and I found that fascinating, particularly after the electoral campaign that we just had. The elections is something that doesn't surprise the journalists that work in the Parliament. But I said to myself, maybe it'll surprise people. Here, our Premier says that we're going to attempt to rise above the din and stop this petty bickering, etc. Wonderful, I'm all for that. So Madam Premier makes her first speech, and then the Leader of the Opposition, first Opposition makes and second Opposition reply to the opening speech. So Mr. Fournier, the Liberal, stands up, and what has he said? Everybody on the government side, leave the room. I see they're not listening, and it was like that for the second Opposition. And nobody sees that, because the cameras look only at the person who is speaking. And during that time, the other people are leaving the room. And so I was taught to listen to people who are speaking, but forget that. That's not what goes on. So this cooperation, collaboration, respect and all that, that's a pipe dream that people are leaving the room. And it surprised me. Maybe I was a bit naive, but everybody just walked out on them. What was your biggest discovery during the elections? When you did door-to-door, do people recognize you from your presence on TV? Was that an advantage? Some people recognize me, certainly, because it's been now 2.5 years that I've not been in front of the camera. But some people say, you remind me of somebody. Are you a real estate salesperson? No, I've heard all kinds of things. Other people said, oh, yeah, you were on the Daily News broadcast. But what was the greatest discovery for me during the election campaign, and what I found the most interesting, is to go to people and listen to what they have to say, and to see to listen to everything that they had to say, to listen to what was going on in their lives. That was interesting. If they weren't interested in my story, either they know who I am, or they already know the party package. But I would go to people and I would answer their questions. I'd explain the program in response to their questions. As you know, in the media, the platforms in 94 Point aren't explained very much. There's just the major points, the big scandals or things like that make the papers. But people wanted details. They'd ask questions, and explaining that is what was my biggest discovery during the election. I realized that I really enjoyed explaining what we were about and what we were attempting to do. So on election night, you were behind the camera or in front of the camera sometimes, but now it was your own career that was on the line here. No, it's not the same at all. I'd covered the last election, the Martin, when Martin was Prime Minister. I was in a riding, I can't remember which, and there was the Liberals and all of that. But to be there waiting for the results, my results, I couldn't eat, and nothing would go in. All I could do was drink water, and I was with other candidates, and some of them were defeated quite quickly. So from the outset, no, you don't feel like partying. Of course, when you see that you're elected, then you say that's wonderful. But other friends didn't have that same joy, so you lose that quite quickly. And then I went to l'Assomption, where Mr. Legault was, the party chief, and he was talking right away on the giant screens. There was some kind of an attempt that took place where Madame Marois was, and nobody was celebrating and having a party after that. And for perhaps a week, all the politicians in Quebec, nobody was keen on partying. And I can tell you that I haven't really had a celebration for my win. Okay, I received a bottle of champagne from somebody still sitting in my fridge, just to show you to what point people were impressed by this event that happened. This one man was killed, another wounded by someone who attempted to kill the premier-elect. When you arrive in Quebec City, now, do you feel pride? It's something new. Yes, you talked about your experiences during the election campaign, but when you arrive in Quebec City as a member, now, I'd already worked in Quebec City at the TV station there. Now, it's colder there, but it's beautiful, and it's a pleasure to return there. Now, that's another thing. I said to myself, if I become a deputy, I'll have to work in Quebec. That's wonderful. I love the city, and everything's nice there. But you're talking about pride. It was the day we were sworn in that gave me the most pride. When we are given the little pin, lapel pin, that only 125 people are entitled. It says member of Parliament, member of the National Assembly, allows you to go anywhere within the building. I was very happy about that. I even rose to sign the documents, and I strutted forward, and then I went and signed. I was very nervous. I scribbled my name, but it was a moment of great pride for me. And as I said, I've never won a medal in my life, but this one, I've won it. But it was at that point in time. And when you realize that it represents something very important. People got up and put vote in the ballot box for me. That is important for me. We have some 15 seconds to close. You are conscious that you have to maintain balance between your personal life and your life as a politician now. Yes, I think I can handle it. You have to block off moments, but politics is a stern master. You have to work in your riding, and you have to work in the National Assembly in Quebec, and you're always caught between the bark and the tree, the rock and a hard place. There's sometimes you're invited to 2 different events, and you have to make a choice. So we're constantly juggling. But yes, we have to also keep some times for our private life. Thank you very much. And for this half an hour that went by very quickly, thank you. It was a pleasure for me.